A mother of many children sheltered a wanderer with a wet carpet in his hands during the storm, and when she peeked into the bundle she was almost speechless with surprise. Sarah was accustomed to rising with the first roosters and therefore never complained or grumbled about her fate. How could she when she had 4 children and her husband had died as a result of an accident in the logging industry? Peter, her eldest, would rise with his mother. Being the oldest, he tried to help her in any way he could. "Mommy, are you going to be late again today?" the little boy asked cautiously. "Yes, honey, you know my partner got sick. Now I have to work for 2, Sarah replied. Peter thought for a moment, then added, "Mom, can I come to work with you?" "Why not? I'll do whatever you say, and school can wait, especially since it's vacation time." Sarah smiled. "No, sweetheart, you need to study. You know the saying, learning is light, ignorance is darkness." A muffled sob came from the children's room. Sarah anxiously looked at the door. Had she awakened someone? Probably just a bad dream, she thought, turning on the old electric stove and placing a pot of water to make fresh porridge for breakfast. In the children's room, her son Nick and her twin daughters Alice and Gracie were asleep. It turned out that the boys weren't Sarah's biological children, although she never said so. She always considered Nick and Peter her sons. In reality, they were children from her late husband Daniel's first marriage. The children's biological mother had abandoned them and disappeared with her lover in an unknown direction. Nobody knew where she was now. Sarah gave birth to twins during her marriage to Daniel, which delighted the young parents immensely. Sarah never distinguished between her own and stepchildren. They were always her beloved and closest people on earth. Even after Daniel's death, her relationship with the boys never changed. "We'll manage somehow. They pay benefits after all, and the fact that the house is old isn't scary at all. We can fix it over time once we save up a bit," Sarah reassured herself. At first glance, everything seemed fine. They received benefits, and she worked on the farm. However, money slipped through her fingers like sand. It was understandable, the children were young, they fell ill often, and the hospital was only in the district center. You couldn't take a sick child on a bus, especially if they had a high fever. You had to hire a car for that. In the summer, the garden was a great help for the large family, where everything grew abundantly. The soil was so fertile that it made everyone who saw Sarah's garden with their own eyes envious. However, one could only guess how much effort and hard work went into this splendor. Nevertheless, Sarah tried not to dwell on problems and looked optimistically to the future. But the death of her beloved husband shook her, making her doubt her own strength. How many times did Daniel warn me? Don't get involved with these private loggers, chasing after money. But what's the point of saying that now, she thought with sorrow. Despite the fact that 2 years had passed since her husband's departure, Sarah still couldn't come to terms with the loss. How could she, when the feelings were so sincere and tender that they took her breath away? Returning from work, Daniel often brought her flowers. No, not exotic roses, of course, but a bouquet of wild daisies picked personally. Sarah loved them very much. She always put them in an old vase on the kitchen table inherited from the previous owner of the house. Being an orphan, she was allocated this humble wing as her residence provided by the Social Welfare Fund. It was understandable, there weren't enough apartments in the city, so they provided housing where possible. At first, Sarah didn't even know whether to be happy or cry. She had never lived in a village before and initially felt uncomfortable. But then, once she got used to it, she felt an incomparable sense of freedom. There were no neighbors on either side, just a small garden instead of a football field. And there was also a well and a wonderful fruit garden. So what if the house is old and leaning to one side? The main thing is that now I have my own home where I feel like a mistress, she thought. With Daniel and the kids moving in, life improved even more. They started planting gardens and fenced the estate. Before, village boys often came to the garden for apples, inadvertently damaging the cucumber and tomato beds. Daniel was respected in the village primarily because he had a knack for fixing things. He could effortlessly craft something useful out of a pile of junk, which greatly impressed the villagers. Sarah knew that if they had lived together a little longer, Daniel would have undoubtedly repaired the house and built an extension to make it less cramped for the kids. but now all of that was in the past. Mechanically stirring porridge, Sarah reminisced about the best years of her life and quietly cried. Thankfully, Peter bustling around didn't notice his mother's tears, sparing her the need to invent an explanation. "All right, son, the porridge is ready. Feed Alice and Gracie in the morning. Oh, and don't forget to tell Nick that if he leaves more than half in his bowl again, he won't get any sweets," Sarah said, composing herself. "Of course, Mom. What are you talking about? I'll do it, don't worry. It's no trouble, it's the holidays after all." "Thank you, my little helper." "What would I do without you?" she said, looking lovingly at her son. Peter smiled, glad that his mom shifted the conversation. He knew that Alice and Gracie, the twins, had told her about the porridge as they weren't capable of keeping secrets at their age. In reality, Nick didn't leave his porridge uneaten by chance. He had a good appetite, and there was no doubt about that. Peter knew for sure that his younger brother could easily devour a couple of bowls of porridge flavored with aromatic butter. But they couldn't talk about it because Peter and Nick had their own secret known only to themselves. Finishing breakfast hastily, Sarah changed and headed to the farm where she had been helping with the cows for the past 4 years. Overall, she liked her job. She always loved animals and never insulted them, respectfully calling the cows nurses. Watching her mother leave, Peter moved away from the window and went to wake up his younger brother. "Come on, get up, sleepyhead, or you'll miss all the fun," Peter said. Nick rolled over to the other side and grumbled, "Mom, it's still early. Can't I sleep a little longer? Let Peter help you." At that moment, his brother jokingly threw his pillow at him. "Hey, come on. Wake up quickly, lazybones. Who do you think I am, your mom? Probably you were reading your books until late at night again, and now you can't get up." Nick lazily opened one eye, then the other. Seeing that he couldn't get rid of his pesky little brother, he got out of bed and placed his bare feet on the floor. Nick loved summer. It was always warm, the garden was full of berries and fruits, just beautiful. Not like winter, when you couldn't run around the house barefoot as you'd catch a sore throat in no time, or something worse. "Well then, let's wash up. We'll have a snack and get down to business while the little ones are still asleep," urged Peter. His brother Nick nodded and shuffled over to the old washstand filled with cool well water from the night before. As everyone knows, that kind of ritual quickly brings you to your senses, and within 5 minutes Nick was sitting across from his older brother, vigorously wielding his spoon and enjoying the tasty, aromatic porridge. After eating about half of his portion, he looked questioningly at Peter. Peter ate about the same amount, then took Nick's plate and transferred its contents to his own. Then he carefully placed it in a canvas bag so as not to attract attention and headed for the door. Nick obediently followed him, glancing around from time to time as they walked down the street towards the woods. There, a little hungry creature awaited the brothers, one they had discovered about a week ago when they went berry picking. Their mother never allowed them to venture far, so the brothers only explored the edge of the forest. It was there that Nick noticed the little wolf cub, nestled so thoroughly in the bushes that only the characteristic gleam of its bead-like eyes gave it away. "Wow, Peter, look! A little puppy," exclaimed Nick. Peter approached closer and, kneeling down, carefully observed the fur-covered youngster. "No, Nick, it's not a puppy. It's a little wolf cub. I saw it in a photo our teacher showed us, a whole litter at school. He said we should stay away from them if we see them, because nearby there'll definitely be a she-wolf." Nick gasped in surprise. "A real she-wolf? But where is she hiding, then? And why is the wolf cub alone? Where are his brothers and sisters? How should I know? Maybe something happened. I think he's hungry. See how he's sniffing around? Clearly wants to eat." Nick rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a crumb-covered piece of biscuit. "Here, give him this. Maybe he'll like it." Peter eagerly grabbed the treat and carefully slid it into the cub's hiding place among the dense bushes. The creature growled with satisfaction, then eagerly pounced on the food, inadvertently nipping at Peter's finger. "Look how hungry he is. Ah, he'd love some of Mom's porridge right now." "You'd lick your fingers," Nick dreamily remarked. It's okay. We'll bring him some porridge tomorrow. Today he'll manage with bread. I'll quickly run home and grab a crust. Just don't tell anyone about this, okay? Peter proposed. Nick smiled and nodded in agreement. From then on, they began to feed the wolf cub, visiting him practically every day. The cub's mother never returned, leading the boys to conclude that she must have perished. Perhaps poachers were involved, or maybe a larger predator like a bear or even a wild boar. During this time, the cub became so accustomed to his new friends that, upon seeing them, he no longer hid. At the sound of their voices alone, he would emerge from his hiding place in the thorny bushes. And what should we name him? Nick asked surreptitiously, so Alice and Gracie wouldn't hear. How about Gray? He's Gray himself. Sounds good, doesn't it? Let's just not tell Mom, or she'll forbid us from going into the woods for berries, and Gray would starve without us, suggested Peter. From then on, Gray the wolf cub became their secret forest friend, whom they didn't tell anyone about. Of course, Alice and Gracie noticed the brothers' frequent absences, especially in the mornings when they were still asleep. But seeing them return with baskets full of berries and mushrooms, they were reassured. After all, where else would the older brothers go? The most interesting part was that even Sarah herself had no idea that her sons had any secrets from her. Today, cautiously glancing around, the brothers stealthily crept along the street. As the eldest, Peter carried a coarse sack with simple provisions intended for Gray. However, today there was no need to fear random passers-by. Since early morning, the sky was shrouded in black clouds, and the smell of ozone was distinctly in the air. We should hurry, Nick. Hopefully, the rain won't start. Look at those lightning bolts flashing. It's a good thing we managed to set up Gray's shelter in time. It's nothing special, but still better than nothing, Peter remarked. Nick looked up and reluctantly agreed with his brother. At that moment, the sky resembled a vast piece of gray cloth covering a birdcage, allowing the canary to sleep. Zigzags of lightning flickered here and there, resembling the tips of the thunder god's arrows from ancient Greek mythology. The boys quickened their pace, hoping to return before the heavens opened with billions of refreshing raindrops. Meanwhile, Sarah had already entered the farmyard, where numerous agricultural buildings sprawled, including barns, cow sheds, and granaries, all resembling one another. Ah, here comes Sarah, a familiar voice called out. Sarah glanced back and met the eyes of the farm owner, Ronald Conway. Good morning, Mr. Conway, she said, forcing a smile. The farmer gave her a scrutinizing look and then gestured with his hand as if calling a loyal dog. Sarah paled and walked toward him on trembling legs. Ronald chuckled, then broke into a smile. Tell me, Sarah, I've been going over the records recently and found out that compared to last season, milk production has decreased by 1.5 times. That's a considerable loss. Do you have any idea what might be causing this? Sarah swallowed nervously. Mr. Conway, but I don't oversee this process. Cows aren't milk machines, after all. There are many factors at play here. Grazing, hay quality, and age shouldn't be overlooked. The farmer looked at her with interest, as if a naturalist observing some exotic animal or plant. Hay quality, you say? Age? Well. All right, if you say so. But I think it's something else. And what might that be, Mr. Conway? Sarah asked, realizing the conversation wasn't going well. I think someone is taking advantage of the opportunity, skimming off a portion of the milk, and selling it under the table. I've been observing you and your partner Catherine more closely lately. And what do you think? Suspicion falls on you. 4 kids, for one thing, and no husband. Isn't that motivation enough to sneak milk off the farm and sell it cheap for the family's benefit? Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, her lips quivering. So, Mr. Conway, just because I don't have a husband, I'm automatically a thief? And what do my children have to do with this? What's the connection? The farmer frowned and approached closer, emitting the smell of stale alcohol and tobacco. Well, sweetheart, there is a connection, and quite a significant one. If you had a husband, or at least someone like him, then the questions would disappear on their own. You're out of line, Mr. Conway. You know my husband died 2 years ago. Why make such jokes? The farmer smirked again, licking his dry lips. Well, one husband died, but another could appear, couldn't he? Even me, for example. What's wrong with me? I have everything: money, the farm, respect in the village. What else do you need? Sarah shook her head and headed toward the barn. Our song is good, shall we start over? Yet such a conversation had already occurred a month or two ago. It almost led to her dismissal, and here it was again. Unfortunately, Sarah failed to consider one thing. The farmer wasn't planning on backing down so easily. And where do you think you're going, dear? Mr. Conway remarked. No need to rush. The cows will manage without you. Do you think I can't find a new worker in the village? No one is irreplaceable, Sarah. She turned around and met the farm owner's gaze. What does this mean, Mr. Conway? Am I fired? Well, of course, Sarah. I'm just amazed by your intuition, he replied sarcastically. Oh, and I almost forgot, don't expect your salary. It will go toward compensating for the milk theft. Imagine that, finding a fool like her. The cows aren't the same, the hay is different, and the yields have decreased. Farewell, and find work elsewhere. With a wave of his hand, the farmer bid her goodbye. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. How could this happen? To fire someone on such a flimsy pretext after she had dedicated 4 years of her life to working on his farm? But Ronald had already made up his mind. The last time when Sarah rudely rejected his proposal and made it clear she wasn't going to tie her life to him, he had been waiting for this opportunity. Now, watching the departing woman, he reveled in the moment of his power, multiplied by an intensified sense of his own dignity. This was his triumph, his victory, so to speak. Feeling the power of a master, he thought to himself, this orphan will crawl back on her knees in a couple of days, and in a week, she will offer to get married at the registry office. At the thought of this, Ronald smiled and returned to the house, intending to recover from yesterday's banquet. Meanwhile, Sarah walked slowly along the street, trying not to think about losing the job she needed like air. It's okay, we'll figure something out. Maybe I'll find something in the district center, or perhaps I should apply to the post office. Did the world revolve around this farm or something? She reassured herself. As if to confirm her words, lightning flashed overhead, splitting the sky in half at an unnatural angle. Sarah quickened her pace, hoping to get home before the rain started. Little did she know that, at that very moment, her little sons were thinking the same thing. Arriving at the edge of the forest, Peter and Nick looked around, but Gray was nowhere to be seen. Maybe someone caught him, like hunters or even an owl. I saw it on TV, Nick asked anxiously. Nah, doesn't seem like someone caught him. Everything seems calm, and his shelter isn't destroyed. Not even a twig is disturbed, you see, Peter replied. But despite his brother's assurances, Nick felt that something had definitely happened to the wolf cub. On the other hand, Alice and Gracie would soon wake up, so they needed to hurry home. All right, Nick, let's go. Let's leave a plate of porridge in the shelter, and the wolf cub will come back and eat, Peter suggested, heading toward the village. Nick hesitated for a moment, then glanced at the empty den of Gray and followed his brother. Approaching the house, Sarah immediately noticed that the gate was unlocked. Where did my rascals disappear to? Did they go to the river? And what about the little sisters, can they be left alone in the house? It's dangerous, after all, she thought. Another peal of thunder rumbled overhead, preceded by a violent bolt of lightning. Still not believing that the older ones had left the house in her absence, Sarah jerked open the door and saw that Peter's sneakers and Nick's sandals were missing from the old shoe rack. Those rascals! They never listened to me. They've gone wild without parental supervision, she thought, shaking her head. To her immense relief, Alice and Gracie were still asleep, nestled in their warm beds and peacefully snoring away. Peeking into their room, Sarah smiled. It had been so long since she had seen her little girls sweetly stretching and reaching out their tiny hands to her. For 4 years straight, Sarah had risen with the dawn, venturing out into the pre-dawn darkness only to return in the same twilight. Now, in the evening outside, rain had begun to fall. Heavy drops drummed against the roof, sounding like someone had scattered large peas from above. Since her sons were still not back, Sarah hurried to the door. Peering out, she saw the gate swing open, her sons running toward the house at full speed. They made it just in time. "Mom, what are you doing at home? Aren't you supposed to be at work?" Peter exclaimed, surprised. Standing behind him, Nick lowered his head, intending to hide. Sarah threw up her hands.